A South Korean dreamland given a second life from the most unlikely of places.
K-pop literally means Korean pop, and it's a global music sensation.
A state-of-the-art facility in the Caucasus that thrust a nation into the world's greatest race.
It's a point of enormous pride for Georgians.
A crumbling Scottish ruin, the battleground in a fight for freedom.
There was an absolute determination to get rid of the English at any cost.
And a Balkan house of horrors that symbolized the worst of humanity.
Faced with certain death, the prisoners busted out.
Decaying relics. Ruins of lost worlds. Sites haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. In the South Korean capital of Seoul, a ramshackle world of make-believe emerges.
In one direction, you can see thousands of dwellings, and in the other is this thick forest. It's really, actually quite idyllic. As you look closer, though, everything starts to look a little creepy.
That's because hidden in the woods is a land of bizarre fantasy.
This place is really spooky. There's skeletons and dolls strewn around. It kind of looks like a horror movie set.
There's something that looks like a medieval castle, but the kind that you'd expect to see in a children's fairy tale book.
You can see tall steel constructions that look like they were going to be fairground rides.
They look like they're about to fall down at any moment.
But there's one ride that looks different from the rest. It's a typical fairground carousel, but it's absolutely spotless.
It's almost like you could flip the power switch there and then and go for a spin. There's something special about this ride.
Once a treasured attraction, then a victim of circumstance, this rundown amusement park has seen it all and lived to tell the tale.
From economic certain doom to the birth of global megastars, this place really embodies the zero to hero story.
아빠로서 또 가장으로서 이 인생을 살았을 때 초기에는 뭔가 희망을 갖고 하다가 어려워져서 그 어려움을 같이 겪었죠. 또 뭐 있는 거 없는 거 처분할 수 있는 것들은 다 처분한 그런 형태로 아주 어려운 생활을 했죠.
Hyunjun Soo has owned this site for over 40 years. He's never given up on his dream of making it a success.
결국은 아빠로서 잘해주지 못하고 또 남들만큼 행복하게 못해줬다는 생각이 많이 드니까 이것을 어떻게든지 완성시켜서 이 가족들이 공유할 수 있는 행복의 공간으로 만들려고 노력하고 있습니다.
When Jun-soo first opened this business in the early 1980s, it started out life as the Youngma Nature Park.
영공원으로 허가를 받아 골프 연습장, 실외 수영장, 놀이공원, 캠핑장, 테니스장 등으로 구성하여
The opening didn't break any records, but the park had moderate success and gained a reputation as the kind of place you could bring your kids at the weekend and have a good time.
정문에서 표를 사자마자 바로 놀이기구로 뛰어갔습니다. 그런 종합적인 요소들이 있어서 인기가 많았습니다.
But in 1989, after only 6 years of operation, a rival business muscled in on the act, offering visitors a supersized version of the Youngma experience.
To this day, Lottie World is still the biggest indoor amusement park in the world. So just imagine this opening up next door to you. I mean, it can't be good for business.
Jun-soo had nothing to fear. He had his own plans to give Youngma Nature Park a competitive edge.
그러다가 1996년에 노후된 새롭게 조성하는 것으로 결정하였습니다.
They started building new rides and began construction on a new 5-story sports complex.
이 회전목마는 전 세계에서 회전목마를 가장 잘 만든다는 미국 제품입니다. 실질적으로 이 말 그림들이 전부 수공으로 그린 그림이에요. 이 전체적으로. 그래서 이 회전목마 자체도 비쌌고 그다음에 이 색감 자체도
There were even rides that incorporated virtual realities. So, I mean, really, it was at the cutting edge for its time.
그 당시에 미국에서 유행한 그 가상현실 게임 같은 기계들. 그래서 앞으로 미래는 디지털 시대가 될 것이다 생각해서
Jun-soo called his labor of love Youngma Land. Before the grand opening, the only thing left to do was finish construction of the sports complex.
But then the unthinkable happened.
In 1997, a major global financial crisis began that destabilized the economies of most East and Southeast Asian countries.
The value of South Korea's currency, the won, plummeted.
또 실질적으로 IMF가 발생하니까 원가 상승 요인, 환율 상승, 아주 복잡한 문제들로서 치명적인 타격을 입게 되는 거죠. 불행하게도 종합체육센터를 짓던 업자가 부도가 나서 준공이 되지 않았습니다.
According to Jun-soo, in the eyes of the local government, this meant the entire site was still considered to be under construction. For this reason, they refused to grant him a permit to open the amusement park. No matter how hard he tried, he could not convince the authorities to change their mind.
2007년 12월에 건설 허가가 취소돼서 도저히 견딜 수 없어서 2012년 11년경에 전기를 끊게 되니 모든 가동이 멈췄죠.
But while the park fell into disrepair, the rest of the country was beginning to reap the rewards of a nationwide program designed to kickstart the ailing economy. A program that would have an unexpected impact on the fate of Youngma Land.
On the brink of bankruptcy, the South Korean government accepted a $58 billion bailout package.
They used part of this loan to fund cultural programs.
They were going to sell Korean culture to the world.
The strategy, dubbed the K-Wave, was an overwhelming success. Korean culture became global news and a huge moneymaker for the country.
This was pop culture, entertainment, music, TV dramas, and movies. During his state visit to South Korea, President Barack Obama even referenced K-Wave. So you could say it's a pretty big deal.
And the jewel in the crown of this K-Wave was K-pop.
K-pop literally means Korean pop, and it's a global music sensation.
It draws musical influences from a huge range of genres, but it's almost equally as well known for its emphasis on aesthetics.
It wasn't long before some of K-pop's biggest stars were drawn to Youngma Land's derelict beauty.
방치되던 시절에 일반 사진 작가들이 와서 사진을 찍어 블로그에 많이 올렸습니다. 그러다가 2011년경에 아이유 2집 자켓 화보를 찍었어요. 연이어 이 백지영의 뮤직비디오, 싫다 뮤직비디오를 찍게 되고요.
So Youngma's unique aesthetic and close proximity to Seoul made it the perfect location for a lot of these K-pop video shoots.
And the centerpiece of these music videos was always Young Marlan's carousel.
가동시키지 못하고 이 사진 소품으로 사용하는 것에 대해서 처음에는 울적했지만 지금은 그래도 가장 자랑스러운 소품이라고 생각합니다. 손님들의 행복을 바라보고 있는 것이 또 내가 조금 도와줬을 때 행복해하는 것을 보았을 때 굉장히 뿌듯하죠.
Today, Young Marland's revival goes from strength to strength, with the location used to shoot music videos, television dramas, and even as a wedding venue. But Jun-soo still refuses to give up on his dream.
그러니까 실질적으로다가 이제 어느 정도 이제 고정된 수입이 들어온다고 봐지니까 좀 안정적인 사는 데 있어서 조금은 좀 안정적인 입장을 갖게 되죠. 새롭게 구성할 또 새롭게 만들 공원에 대한 생각을 하면서 희망을 갖고 반복됩니다.
Deep in the Caucasus, near the Georgian capital of Tbilisi, a sprawling site tells a story that is out of this world.
In the middle of this rustic beauty, you come across the ruins of some large industrial or scientific facility.
The location is like this vast expanse of concrete with these colossal, grim metal structures.
Then there's this very strange, giant cube of a building that has no walls or floors inside. It's just a maze of scaffolding.
This once high-tech complex was a source of pride for a country that rose from the ashes of war to boldly go where this nation had never been before.
The scale of it tells you this was obviously very big and very well funded.
It's a paradox because what went on here was top secret, but later it would be celebrated as one of Georgia's greatest achievements.
Shota Serodza first came here as a research scientist over 50 years ago, a time when Georgia was still part of the Soviet Union and the Cold War was raging.
თუ გნებავთ, რომ აი ამ მაღალ ტექნოლოგიურ ეპოქაში სხვას ვაჯობოთ, აუცილებელია სხვაზე მეტი ვიმუშაოთ. სწორედ აი ამ
Shota's mentor, Dr. Elgudja Medzmariashvili, is the sole reason this site exists.
არსებობენ ადამიანები, რომლებიც ღვთიური ნიჭით არიან დაჯილდოვებული და მათ დღე და ღამე უნდა იმუშაონ, სხვანაირად არ შეუძლიათ. და ეს ლოგიკურიც არის ეს ამ წარმატებას რომ მივახციეთ.
Dr. Medzmariashvili is a real genius. Early in his career, he worked on the challenge of making portable bridges for the military, things that could be packed into small spaces, then rapidly expanded to cross rivers and streams.
His pioneering efforts developing collapsible technology hadn't gone unnoticed by Soviet rulers in Moscow.
Military planners approached and asked him to pause the bridge work to work on a new project.
This project would have to take place in a remote area in total secrecy, but he'd have all the money he needed to get the job done.
In the late 1970s, construction started on this state-of-the-art facility. Dr. Medzmariashvili and his team had one mission: design and build the key component of an early warning system to detect enemy missile attacks from space.
This would help the USSR regain the military advantage over NATO.
But the challenge was how to get it there. It needed to be folded into a very compact package and then, in space, be unfolded, unfurled to its full size.
The program's success was reliant on the creation of a 100-foot wide retractable transmitter called a reflector antenna.
A reflector antenna is really the backbone of a lot of modern communications. If you're trying to send some kind of signal a long distance, it's going to diffuse as it goes. But if you can create a large bowl which will reflect that energy back to a common receptor point, then you can multiply dramatically the power of the signal you receive.
When it comes to reflector antennae, it seems size matters.
Bigger reflectors can see detail more clearly, communicate faster, and the signals are harder to jam.
ანუ ჩვენ ვიმყოფებით მაღლის ტრენჩი, რომლის გაბარიტები გახლავთ სიმაღლეში 40 მეტრი, სიგანეში და სიგრძეში ასევე 40 მეტრი. ეს არის მექანიკური გაუწოდებობის მაღლების სტენდი, რომელზეც ხდებოდა. ახლა რაც შეეხება დანიშნულებას თვითონ ანტენის, ეს ანტენა გასაშლელი რეფლექტორი 30 მეტრის დიამეტრით გაკუთვნილი იყოს რა.
The early experiments at what was called the Georgia Institute of Space Structures were a resounding success. Everything was going to plan until fate intervened.
In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union started falling apart.
Amid the turmoil that followed, Georgia began its fight for independence.
A civil war broke out, as was the case in a lot of the countries that were in the former Soviet Union. It was a pretty chaotic period.
As violence spread across the nation, valuable assets were targeted by gun-toting looters. The contents of this site were no exception.
ანუ ეს შენობა წარმოადგენს საწყობს, რომელშიც თავის დროზე განთავსებული იყო ყველაზე ძვირადღირებული მაკომპლექტებლები, რომელიც კი გაგვაჩნდა ჩვენ რეფლექტორული სხვადასხვა განივი კვეთის. აქ იყო განთავსებული ძრავები, რედუქტორები, აქ იყო განთავსებული ამრეკლი ბადეები, მოლიბდენის, ვოლფრამის, მოოქსროვილი ბადე. აქ იყო განთავსებული სხვა.
When stability in Georgia was restored, the team returned to find their equipment safely preserved. The only problem was that with the Cold War now a distant memory, the military had no use for their reflector antenna. But as Russia got back on its feet, its space agency would come calling.
They remembered their pioneering work, and they had a special project they needed help with. They wanted to put a special kind of antenna on their space station Mir, and they thought that this was the place to design and build it.
The space station was well past its sell-by date and due to be mothballed the following year.
But it still had room for one last mission.
რა თქმა უნდა, ყველაზე დაძაბული სიტუაცია პროექტის შესრულების მხრივ, როდესაც ტესტირებას ვატარებდით პირველი ქართული კოსმოსური ობიექტისა.
The team pulled out all the stops to complete the build on time, ensuring they were ready for the big launch.
But then there was a hitch. In the Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where the rocket needed to launch, there had been an accident and a spillage of highly toxic rocket fuel.
So Kazakh authorities suspended all launches.
Even a few days' delay would shift Mir's orbit out of range.
At the last minute, the officials in Kazakhstan relented. They said they would allow the launch to go forward.
On the 6th of July, 1999, the reflector antenna that would become known as the Georgian space object was successfully delivered to Mir.
When the cosmonauts got in position, plugged it in, they flipped the switch, it started to unfurl, but then it stopped. And it went a little bit more, and it stopped. It was stuck.
Back on Earth, it looked like the team's hard work was all for nothing.
შეეხება უშუალოდ ექსპერიმენტებს, რომელიც იმართებოდა ინსტიტუტიდან. ნუ რა თქმა უნდა, კომუნიკაციის ასე ვთქვათ, წინამძღოლი იყო ბატონი ელგუჯა მეძმარიაშვილი. ჩვენ მას გვერდით ვახლდით. პირადად მე ვეხმარებოდი, ასე ვთქვათ, რა თქმა უნდა, ყველაზე დაძაბული იყო საკმაოდ.
The race was on to find and fix the problem before the antenna's moving parts froze in the cold vacuum of space. To make matters worse, the entire spectacle was being broadcast live on Russian television.
The event was a big deal. But when things started to go wrong, they stopped calling it the Russian project and started calling it the Georgian project.
After 5 days of painstaking problem solving, the source of the issue was discovered, and it was absolutely not a Georgian problem.
The space station's wiring was old and degraded, and it wasn't delivering the voltage that the antenna's motors needed to properly deploy. When they got that fixed, the antenna continued unfurling and reached its correct position.
და მესმის ბატონი ელგუჯა მეძმარიაშვილის ყვირილი. თელ ხმაზე. ეს იყო რაღაცა აი წარმოუდგენელი ემოცია, ეს იყო წარმოუდგენელი აი ჟრუანტელი, რომელსაც ყველამ ტანში. ეს იყო ჩვენი ტრიუმფალური, იმიტომ რომ კონსტრუქცია მთლიანად დაპროექტებული იყო საქართველოს.
In the days after the successful demonstration, Georgia's first space object was released from Mir into orbit around the Earth. But a chronic lack of funding meant this was one of the last reflectors tested at the Institute of Space Structures before it was abandoned. In 2016, the Georgian space object was found to still be operational.
A few amateur astronomers who've located it by telescope have thought they were looking at a UFO. It certainly has the look of a flying saucer.
After this time, though, it's thought to have descended to Earth and burnt up in the atmosphere. It may be gone, but it's definitely not forgotten.
It's a point of enormous pride for Georgians even today. There's a stamp that commemorates it.
On July 23rd each year, Georgians still celebrate Georgian Space Object Day.
On a rocky outcrop of Aberdeenshire, Scotland, a silent ruin stands monument to an old foe.
This is a place of rugged, stormy, craggy coast with high cliffs tumbling down to rocky beaches.
High above the sea, you find ruins of an old castle. And as you move closer, you see this imposing gatehouse. This is the only way in and the only way out.
Naturally, it's an outstanding defensive position and a place that looks very difficult to attack and penetrate.
But there are signs that at one time, this place would have been quite the seat of luxury.
There's even one small area that has a sign over the top that says Lion's Den. This is a very interesting space.
Over the centuries, this stronghold has been at the heart of Scotland's battle against its bitterest enemy. One fought by its bravest warrior that would inspire a Hollywood epic.
Nobody likes to see their homeland invaded by a foreigner. And there was an absolute determination to get rid of the English at any cost.
From burning a garrison alive to sneaking treasures past a regicidal army, this castle has seen it all.
Alistair Cunningham is a proud Scot. He's spent many years studying the history of Dunnottar Castle and the role it played in Scotland's fight against their southern neighbour.
We are lucky that the buildings, although ruined, are really in fairly good order. and we can see different aspects of Scottish life and Scottish history all on one rock.
Hostilities with the English at Dunnottar first started in the late 13th century, when the Scottish king Alexander III died with no obvious heir to his throne.
Perhaps stupidly, the Scots decided that they should ask Edward I of England who would be the most appropriate monarch. Edward, of course, chose the person that was most likely to do his bidding.
When Edward's choice of successor, John Balliol, refused to do as he wanted, he went to war.
In 1296, the dread English king invaded Scotland and effectively began treating it as his feudal territory.
And one of the positions that the English armies took was Dunnottar Castle because of its location and its strategic promise.
The Scottish noblemen couldn't get things together. They were too disparate to fight back until William Wallace, who we know from the movie Braveheart, brings them together.
Wallace inspired the Scots to take up what arms they had and fight back against the ruthless English King Edward.
Wallace rampaged through the Scottish lowlands, leading a string of successful attacks against English strongholds. In 1297, he reached Dunnottar.
William Wallace, the great patriot, rose up to re-establish Scottish domination, and his men besieged the rock.
Although Dunnottar was impressively fortified, the English defenders were just no match for the sheer ferocity of the Scots who poured over the walls.
It was a terrifying spectacle of these wild Scottish warriors just tumbling in amidst these more civilized English defenders and tearing them to pieces.
The English garrison retreats, and they go into the chapel, hoping that because this is a sacred space, they'll be safe.
They barred the doors. Presumably, they were on their knees.
And William Wallace goes, oh, you know, just burn them. So they set fire to the building, burning all the English inside. But eventually, as the tale ends badly for the Scots, as they are defeated.
William Wallace was eventually captured and executed by the English.
Yet the spirit of Wallace's rebellion lived on, and after 30 years of struggle, Scotland won its freedom, ushering in a new golden age at Dunnottar.
From the 1400s, there's relative peace at the castle. They're able to build upon what they have, and it becomes a really luxurious space.
This was the dining room, great big fireplace, lovely south-facing windows with lots of light, big, probably decorated ceiling, tapestry on the wall there. And downstairs is the kitchen and the serving area.
And as another example of how this fortress was domesticated, they have a pet lion and a pet bear there, so clearly this is a sort of place that is not facing imminent combat.
Dunnottar became one of the cornerstones of governance for the Scottish kingdom, ruled over by the Earl Marshal.
This was an important title that included responsibility for the protection of the crown jewels of Scotland, known as the Honours of Scotland.
But the peace at Dunnottar was about to be shattered.
In the mid-1600s, England erupts into civil war.
The catalyst was a fight between King Charles I and his own parliament.
The parliamentarian side was led by the Puritan Oliver Cromwell, who feverishly took the fight to the English king.
The Scots see an opportunity and throw their support behind Cromwell. They send troops to the south and play a major role in the defeat of King Charles I.
In 1649, Charles was executed. This, however, was a step too far for the Scots, who switched sides, backing the deceased monarch's son, Charles II.
After the death of his father, Charles II landed along the coast in Scotland and came to Dunnottar in 1650 and spent several nights in the castle. He was then crowned hurriedly at Scone Palace, the traditional crowning place of Scottish kings.
And in response, Oliver Cromwell sent his forces north of the border in an invasion of Scotland.
And it was after that that the honours of Scotland that had been used in the crowning had to be effectively smuggled back here because Cromwell's troops were patrolling this whole area.
While Charles escaped to France, Cromwell's parliamentarian forces made light work of the Scottish resistance, defeating their armies in the field and capturing every occupied castle, bar one, Dunnottar.
In 1652, this was the only part of Scotland that wasn't under Cromwell's control, and he was damn determined that he was going to get those crown jewels.
So Cromwell orders up a siege, and he says, I want that castle, I want the honours of Scotland.
And his cannons were up on the hills here. Right where we are, the Dunnottar cannons would have been placed, but they were much smaller, and inevitably they had limited powder and ball.
The Scottish forces that are there at the castle are outgunned, outmanned.
Despite this, a direct assault on Dunnottar would have cost the lives of hundreds of Cromwell's men. So they just maintained the siege and pounded the castle with cannon fire.
It must have been fairly terrifying. There was no way out. Their days inevitably were numbered.
With defeat imminent, the defenders concocted a plan to win a different kind of victory.
As long as the honours of Scotland remained intact, there was a symbol of kingship here in Scotland. And so the decision was taken that the honours of Scotland needed to be smuggled out. And we think that it was probably from a window up here that the honours of Scotland were lowered in 1652 down to a serving lady who then walked the honours of Scotland contained in a creel on her back down to Kinneff Kirk.
Can you imagine what it must have felt like to walk away from an enormous army like that, knowing what you'd done and not daring to look back in case you gave the game away? It must have been exhilarating and terrifying.
After 8 months, I think the defenders would have felt rather bruised and battered, both literally and psychologically. But the main thing they had to do was to save the honours of Scotland. And they must have felt absolutely triumphant when they saw in the half-light the old lady walking down the beach.
When the English finally do make it into the castle, of course, they look everywhere for the honours of Scotland, and they are nowhere to be found.
Cromwell would go on to rule over Scotland until his death in 1658, at which time Charles II returned from exile to reclaim his throne, once again uniting the realm. Yet Dunnottar's days as a seat of power were nearing an end. In the 1700s, the castle was stripped of all its valuables and then finally abandoned. Today, Dunnottar Castle is a popular tourist attraction. Luckily, certain English visitors can expect a warmer reception than they might have received in years past.
The now King Charles III visited the castle in 2019, and today he fares far better in Scotland than either of his predecessors had done.
In the former communist country of Serbia, a menacing structure sits uneasily within the city of Nish.
Nish is the third largest city in Serbia. And during the Yugoslav period, it was a major regional center. It's still a major regional center. It's not where you expect to find this place.
It's a large compound surrounded by a high wall with a few major building blocks at its center.
Once you spot the guard towers, it becomes obvious what this place is.
This is clearly some kind of prison camp.
But this is no remnant of the country's communist past.
We've got at least one guard hut with German writing on it that tells us this is a Second World War era German camp.
This was a place intended to break the will of a people by whatever means deemed necessary.
It was mostly a detention center for resistance prisoners. As you can imagine, they didn't go down without a fight.
You can see the bullet holes. They were ready to put people up against these walls and shoot them.
The camp was the scene of some awful atrocities, but it also witnessed some incredible bravery and an escape that would go down in Serbian legend.
Veoma je bitno da se očuvaju uspomene na sve ono što se događalo u Drugom svjetskom ratu, a se čuva uspomena na sve to što se...
Nebojša Ozimić is an authority on his country's history. The Nazi conquest of his hometown is a subject close to his heart.
Da su Nemci okupirali Niš i ušli u Niš 9. aprila 1941. godine.
One of the first acts of the invading army was to repurpose a former Red Cross medical supply depot into this, the Nish concentration camp. A prison for Serbian citizens deemed a threat to Hitler's occupation of the region.
Communists, partisans, Jews, resistance fighters, these were the primary targets who were held here. There were premises for interrogation and torture. There were solitary confinement cells.
Why are the Nazis in the Balkans? Why are they in Yugoslavia and in Greece? They're there to protect their southern flank against the British and the French taking advantage of the Germans going off to fight in the Soviet Union.
Rather than deploy significant troops to occupy Serbia, the Nazis opted for a different tactic.
They proclaimed that for every Nazi soldier that was injured by the resistance, they would kill 50 Serbs and Jews. For every Nazi soldier who was killed, 100.
Prisoners held here were often the first to be executed if the Nazi leadership chose to make an example of the local populace.
In January 1942, German forces experienced high casualties in an offensive in the south of the country. Retaliation was expected.
Rumors circulated among the detainees that payback was coming. It was soon confirmed beyond doubt.
Slave laborers talked to each other. And when the Romani prisoners were being used to dig mass graves in the woods nearby, the rest of the prisoners found out.
The captives faced a choice: die at the hands of their captors, or seize the opportunity to control their own destiny.
So a bunch of Serbs, they get together, they coordinate a simple plan.
The plan was that during their evening walk, one group would neutralize the lighting control room. A second group would take the machine gun nests.
A third group would take control of the office quarters, and the fourth would ensure that there was clear passage from the main gate, which was the ultimate target.
On the night of the breakout, Their plan for escape was dealt a huge blow.
Kada su izašli u večernju šetnju, primetili su da je pojačana straža na glavnoj kapiji. Tako da su morali da promene plan.
But with few options, one of the leaders yelled at his comrades to start scaling the fences.
Chaos ensued. The sounds of whistles, barking dogs, and gunshots echoed as they ran for their lives.
And 105 of them actually managed to escape.
Nemci su bili potpuno iznenađeni. Nisu mogli da pretpostave da će do ovako nečega uopšte doći.
For the German authorities, the Great Escape was a catastrophic humiliation.
The fallout from this episode was brutal. 850 men were killed in response, shot on Bubanya Hill.
And one of the things that the Germans do here is they rebuild the camp to make it more secure.
Over a 4-year period, the Nish concentration camp held over 30,000 prisoners. It functioned with cruel efficiency, even as it became clear Hitler's war in Europe was lost. On the 14th of September 1944, the fleeing German army desperately tried to destroy evidence of their crimes.
Documents and papers were burned, and 37 of the remaining prisoners were shot on the day they abandoned the camp.
Prevodioci, jedni su bili ljudi koji su brinuli o čistoći, jedni su bili kuvari. Dakle, bili su očevici mnogih zlodela i kao takvi nisu mogli da prežive. Ironijom sudbine, mesec dana kasnije je Niš oslobođen od Nemaca.
In the years after the war, this site passed between the hands of the ruling military, but was never again used as a prison. In the 1960s, the decision was made to build a memorial to the fallen and to honor the bravery of those who made it out alive.